Here is another behind the scenes look at how I create some of my mixed media sculptures. In this case, the sculpture is of these two robot suits interacting, one shooting a laser beam clean through the other, and the resulting explosion then coming from that second robot. So it's going to be built at its core out of clay, and then it's going to get mixed media from that point onwards. So let's look into this. First, the way that I started constructing this was on the wheel. A lot of people use the wheel for functional purposes, making cups, bowls, and what have you, but it can also just be a way to build components. So what you see here is a collection of things that I've used to build the sculpture that you're about to see. I've hand-formed some bits here and there in between, but for the most part, this is it. This is the bulk of the pieces involved. I always talk about how the consistency and wall thickness is important for a sculpture, and if you're working on the wheel, making all of your pieces on the wheel, I think it's a lot easier to do that. Granted that you have some familiarity with working on the wheel. Now keep in mind, these don't have to be perfectly thrown by any means, they just have to be close to what you want for the shape of your sculpture. This is what will be the shooting robot, down on one knee, as it's positioning to fire. At this point, it's about leather hard. I have most of the pieces put together. It's a couple more things to cut on angles and piece back together. You'll see that that centerpiece is going to remain absent, that cockpit dome. That I'm going to make out of resin ultimately, so it has a transparency to it. So for right now, I'm just setting everything up. This is what it looked like totally finished before the firing. All of those pieces that I've put on as details, like the rivets and the fingers, those sort of elbow guards, and then that backpack, all of those were hand built in very simple ways and then slipped and scored, added on top. So I have one of my components ready with this. Another view showing the side of that arm. You'll notice that there are these openings, both the arm and this backpack. I'm going to eventually sculpt some cables that will be running between them. I don't want to put that in there now because there's a higher chance of that breaking and snapping as it shrinks in relation to the size of the body. And I also want to leave some options to play with the LED lighting system that I'm going to be using with this. So for right now, I'm leaving those punched all the way through into the cavern of the body. There it is, finished. Again, pre-fire. Some more angles. The other notable thing here is that I've now included a base. This rock-like base, it puts it into place. It's going to have the same context underneath the other robot, so we know that they're supposed to be interacting with one another on the same level surface. So I make it look like rocks, something planetary. And then using the same hand building methods with those thrown pieces, I construct this, which is the second robot. This is the one with the destruction occurring to it. The explosion is going to be happening out of this opening that you see ripped into the center of the body. So all of these are thrown except for, of course, the details and then this rock base, which again anchors it. It serves a more functional purpose in this more than the other robot because here you see it has this extreme tilt backwards. This would fall over if it didn't have the weight of this rock slab underneath to hold it in where it is. So I wanted this to look like it's being blasted over, falling over, and so it was necessary then to have a base here more than just decorative reasons or to give a context. It's actually for the structure. Here are both of them fired. So you'll see they've been taken up to their maturing temperature. Once again, I'm doing a cold surface application here. I don't need this to be porous and then glazed or anything like that. They're taken up to whatever the maximum temperature is, and allowed to become strong in that way. You'll see I'm playing with things like straws for tubes, figuring out the positioning of them. What's poking out the front of this gun arm is actually LED lighting, thinking about how the laser beam is going to work. Some more images of me working that part out. Now, the way I surface these particular pieces is by first spray painting them with a white lacquer. If you look in this right-hand image, you'll see there's a white gloss to it, and this other robot in the background has the same thing going on. And the way I added color to these is a little unorthodox. What I'm doing is I'm taking Derwent brand Inktense pencils. It's like a watercolor pencil, only it's ink. So working with ink, I color in parts of the surface, the rivets, these in-between connections, the feet, the elbows, any details that I want to be contrasting. I'm coloring that in with these pencils, and then I'm using a brush to paint that around. I'm just laying it down on the surface and then painting it around. I'm actually using mostly rubbing alcohol, 70 to 90% rubbing alcohol instead of water, or mixing that with water for the purposes of, one, reducing the surface tension of that liquid, so it's going to move around a little more fluidly using that rubbing alcohol in there. And also, that removal of the surface tension is going to help it stick onto that surface a little bit better. It actually activates the surface of that lacquer underneath. It dissolves it a little bit, it seems, and it's holding into it better that way. So this is the way I decided to start working color-wise with this. Yeah, it's one way to go, ink on spray-painted ceramic. Now, to create that laser beam, here's what I needed. First of all, I had to buy some kind of an LED light system, and that's what you're seeing here in the background. A simple controller, 2 AA batteries. You can turn it to 3 settings, which are on, blinking, or blinking rapidly. And so you'll see that demonstrated in a moment. So that is going to be wrapped around one of these Plastruct plexiglass rods. You can buy these at most art stores. I think I got this at Dick Blick. And I'm going to saw that down to the length that I want it, and I'm going to eventually wrap that LED rope around it. And then using a hot glue gun, I'm going to sculpt details to this laser beam and help hold that in place. So here I've stuck that plexiglass rod, which is now invisible, into the center of that shooting arm, that gun arm of the one robot. Then I've wrapped a blue LED cord around that plexiglass rod, and that goes all the way up to the tip. I want this thing to be able to light up, so I need some material that's going to hold it in place and protect it, but also allow light to pass through. So I'm using hot glue. Now, for the sake of sculpting with hot glue, I recommend using a high-temp hot glue stick run through a low-temp hot glue gun. High-temp hot glue through a low-temp hot glue gun. So that glue isn't going to want to move around very much until it gets really hot. But if you put it through a hot glue gun that's using a low temperature, it's going to be enough to melt it some, but hold on to its shape. So you see these cords being formed over the surface, overlay again and again and again to get this rippling, rushing effect. That's done with the hot glue gun, sculpting it on the surface that way. Same with this illusion of blasts coming out of the muzzle of the gun arm. It looks like this implied explosion coming out. I'm going to paint that as well as the laser beam. But here you can see it just as it is in hot glue, and holding this piece at a 45-degree angle. So this is dangling down and moving the hot glue gun away at about a 45-degree angle. I'm able to build up on the surface very slowly. So you want to lay down your hot glue, slowly trail it away and pull it away until it sets up. You're going to hold it in place. It'll set up. Then you cut that off with the heat of the tip or with the scissors. Then you go back in, and then you make another pass just to thicken it up. And keep working that way until you have your details. I'm using Test Store's brand model paint on this. It's an acrylic-based paint. I like the color that it has, the body that it has. It's slightly translucent. So I'm going over the whole thing, disguising some of that cord that's the LED running underneath, and making it all look consistent and less like what it is, which is hot glue. I want to disguise that some. Now I'm going in with a purple type of paint, same brand, still using more rubbing alcohol than water. It's really grabbing the surface better that way for me. Now, once the color is down, I go over that with a clear nail polish. That gives a thick protective coating over all of that, and it also makes that paint look even more translucent, allowing light to pass through it. So you'll see here in this video demonstration where I'm testing the light, how that LED comes through that hot glue, that paint, and then that clear coating of nail polish over the top. And it really has a dynamic look to it. So I've set the light on this blinking mode right now. See, I've bunched up the hot glue at the end with more of the LED rope to have it look like the front of that blast. And so I've positioned it so I can figure out how that will sit in relation to the other robot. Concerning the explosion of the other robot, I tried something a little different here. I got myself some cotton batting. Batting is something that you'll find at any Joann's or fabric store. It's used to stuff any number of things, teddy bears, pillows, whatever. You get some of this stuff and it will look cloud-like. You see this here. This is how it is right out of the package. And if you take light and put it behind, it does some interesting things. It diffuses the light very well, making it look like smoke or just some kind of a chaotic burst of light. To add a little color, I've taken some of this batting and gone over it with paint, some acrylic orange, some acrylic yellow and orange here, and I'm going to be layering this up and balling this up over the top of these Christmas lights. Battery-powered Christmas lights. So they have a nice white glow to them. I can set it for blinking, steady on, a couple different settings. I just leave them on, and then I have these pieces of different colored cotton wrapped over the top, and that's what's going to give color to the explosion, to that blast. This is what that combination looks like in a simple test shot that I took of this. So it's not in total darkness, but it gives you enough of the idea. The lights underneath, and then the layers of the colored cotton, and then the white cotton on top. You'll notice this looks quite a bit like smoke emanating from within. And I'm also, even in this relatively well-lit room, I'm seeing the glow, the warmth of the explosion on the white of the suit, which I really wanted to have for dramatic effect. Here, some more color tests, light tests that I was doing with these pieces. You can see what both of them looks like with the blue before that was overpainted on the shooting robot. Here you also see this dome that I've constructed out of resin using a simple bowl-like mold. I've poured the resin into that and made a thin shell. So that is inset into the front of that egg-like shape of the body, making a cockpit. And then over here we have, again, the explosion happening. I'm sculpting around with that cotton, making it look like a directional blast. Here is a better view of the painted laser beam, because now you can see there's some contrasts in the darkness of the paint where I've gone over it with purples and whites. You're getting a different look of the light coming through, that blue light coming through there. And this is just the way that I'm looking at it, interacting with the beam going straight through that body and having the explosion wrap around that, having those lights interact with one another. So here it is finished, photographed in the light. You can still see a little bit of the LED underneath the laser beam, a little bit in that explosion, but it's not as dramatic as it looks in the dark. So totally painted at this point, and I'm having all the dramatic look that I wanted with this, where it almost looks like this unarmed robot was really caught off guard and just walloped with this laser beam, and that force driving it backwards and sending this explosion off from the inner cavity. Now, photographed in the dark is where this really shines, literally and figuratively speaking. So you see the just electric nature of that laser blast coming from that one robot, and then the dynamic, realistic looking explosion coming off of the other one. And the way in which the light, each of those lights, plays off of the bodies of these robots is important to me. I wanted that look, so that's why I need to see this without lights on at all once in a while. Here is a lower angle of that shot in the dark, where it really looks like that flame is billowing up into the air and that laser's cutting clean through. Here you see each of them completely on their own, in total darkness. Really shows how much light changes the surrounding parts. The light of the laser making everything blue, the light of that explosion giving a warmth to everything around it. So the both of those together create the finished piece. So using a combination of wheel-thrown ceramic parts, resin, hot glue, paint, LED lighting, and even some cotton, you're able to accomplish something like this, where it has a dynamic look of implied movement, whether the lights are on and off, on or off, but when they're off, you really have this light show going on, something that can grip the viewer. And again, the settings can be adjusted on most LEDs, where these can flash and pulse at different rates, giving an entirely different vibe. So I would encourage you all to consider playing around with some of these other materials that can push a sculpture beyond just being a ceramic object and being something a little bit more dynamic.